Welcome to this introduction to professional genealogical methodology. Whether you are new to genealogy or looking to formalize your approach, this lecture provides a foundational framework that distinguishes hobby-level family history from professional quality research. We'll cover two interlocking systems today. First, a repeatable 5-step research cycle that you can apply to any genealogy problem. And second, the Genealogical Proof Standard, the quality control system that keeps your work honest and defensible. This is a principle-first orientation. Rather than jumping into specific databases or record types, we'll establish the mental framework that professionals use, regardless of what part of the world they do their research in, or what methodologies they employ, or what record sets they use. Because once you internalize these principles, you can apply them to any time period or jurisdiction or record set. Let's start with a fundamental shift in thinking. Genealogy is more than just collecting names. It's not just building the biggest tree or racing to connect to historical figures. It is evidence-driven identity work. What does this mean? You are once using historical records or DNA evidence in conjunction with to prove that person A in record set X is the same as person A in record set Y. When you place that person in correct relationships to parents, spouse, children, and siblings over time. This requires that you always track 4 things simultaneously. The first thing is identity. Who is this person, really? Not who you hope they are, not what the hints suggest they might be, but what and who the evidence actually supports. Relationship. How are these people connected? A record mentioning John Smith, son of William, that's a relationship claim. What proves it? Is it consistent with other evidence that one has or has encountered? Time and place. A person's life must be physically possible. If your subject was supposedly born in Virginia in 1820 and married in Ohio in 1825 with the records listing that they were age 35, something's wrong. Geography and chronology are your reality checks. Evidence quality. Not all evidence is equal. A signed affidavit from a participant carries different weight than a database transcription from an information collection that's of unknown provenance. We'll discuss this in depth shortly. When you adopt this mindset, you stop asking, is this person in my tree or belong to my tree? And start asking, what does the evidence actually support? The 5-step research cycle. Here's the operational framework you'll use for every research problem. Different programs label these steps slightly differently, but the functional cycle is universal. Step number 1, define a focused research problem or question. This is where most beginners go wrong. They start searching before they know what they're looking for. They hit the search button for an ancestor, and they without thinking about the specifics. Second, survey what it's already known. Before chasing new records, take an inventory of what you have, what's already been searched, and also, if you can, identify other people who have done research and pick their brain and see what records they've kept on their searches. That could save you a lot of time. And expense, particularly when you have to order things. Step 3, you plan targeted research. This is where you shift from random searching to strategic retrieval based on jurisdiction, time period, and record availability. Ideally in a triaged manner. Professional genealogists have to be very careful to plan their sessions so that they're most likely to achieve success for their clients, and you do have to plan judiciously. Step 4, you collect, analyze, and correlate the evidence from extracted from the records you find. So the core work, extracting facts, evaluating sources, and correlating across the records. Step 5, you resolve your conflicts and you write a conclusion. Because those are that's actually, writing conclusions is a 6th step. But conflicts are normal. Resolution is the skill. Then you write up what you've proven. You might notice there's a loop at the bottom of this slide. Your conclusion almost always generates the next question. You prove that John Smith's parents were William and Mary Smith. Now you need to research William and Mary. You might wonder if William and Mary Smith had any other kids and such. The cycle repeats. This isn't a linear process you complete just once. It's a spiral that you revisit continuously as your research deepens. And you may find that you may be revisiting the same people as your knowledge expands, as new resources come out, new search tools. I have found myself doing that multiple times with many of my family members. And yeah. All right, slide 4. Step 1, define a focused research question. Let's examine each step in detail. Step 1 is defining a focused research question, and this is where precision matters enormously. Look at the weak question, find John Smith's parents. What's wrong with it? It's vague. Which John Smith? There could be dozens in the same county in the United States, for instance. What time period? What location? You could spend years searching without knowing if you found the right person. Now look at the strong question. Identify the parents of John Smith who married Mary Jones in Adams County, Ohio on the 12th of May, 1842, and distinguish him from other John Smiths in the county that were living there from 1830 to 1860. Notice that this question includes a specific identifying event, a marriage, a precise date and place, a spouse's name, and explicit acknowledgement that there are other John Smiths who need to be eliminated. Your deliverable from this step is a 1 to 2 sentence research question that states what you already know, what you need to prove, and how you distinguish your subject from all others with the same name. A good research question is testable. You should be able to look at the evidence and say definitively this answers the question, or this doesn't answer the question. Resist the urge to skip this step. A well-defined question saves hours of unfocused research later. Step 2. Survey what's already known. Before you search for new records, you need to take some inventory. This step prevents wasted effort and helps you understand the foundation you're building on. There's many ways you can go about doing this. Some you might pull out a table in Word, make an Excel chart. Some use Airtable, which is a very useful online program that can be expensive. To operate if you pay for the premium tools, but you can do a lot of it in Excel with some creative macros and scripts and whatnot. To go and carefully gather and curate what you know and gather. This step prevents wasted effort and helps you understand the foundation you're building on. Start with family sources. If you are lucky to be working on your own family and your working generation's close enough that you have people that you know that have records, old photographs, old letters, family Bibles, funeral cards and programs, oral history. These aren't always 100% reliable, but they're valuable clues that point you towards verifiable records, and in some cases, they might be the only way that you even know where to start digging. If you're lucky, you might find stuff like passports, personal papers, things like that, where people have their places and dates very specifically written out that might not exist anywhere else. And because of the provenance of the document, it's your ancestor for sure, and it usually provides a very solid basis for building. Usually you can verify it with other records in a lot of cases if it's a handwritten original document, like particularly if it was produced by, say, a government and whatnot, or other organization, not just simply family writing down family information for their own personal use. Next, you look at prior trees, online trees, ancestry hints, family search trees, other people's research. That's the critical point. Treat those only as clues, never as facts. There's also a lot of published genealogies out there that might exist. Other researchers do make mistakes copying their work, copies their errors as well. You need to verify everything against original sources before you personally accept it as truth. Then you catalog the documents you have, census records, certificates, obituaries, newspaper clippings, whatever you have, and what information each contains, and importantly what they don't note that you'd be expecting them to or you'd like to know. Finally, documents have been searched. If you've already searched Adams County marriage records from 1840 to 1845 and found nothing, write that down. Otherwise, 6 months from now, you're going to be searching that same record again. Your deliverable here is a starting database with citations, or at least provenance notes for every item. Where did each piece of information come from? Who provided it? When was it recorded? Etc. This inventory tends to reveal gaps. If you have a death certificate but no birth record, that's a gap to fill or to seek to fill. Maybe there's not one. If you have census records for 1850 and 1870, but there's not an 1860. Fun fact, if we're talking about the U.S. here, there's no 1890 census except for very few scant locations because the thing caught fire, and all but a few pages survived. That's a gap. Identifying gaps here can help you prioritize step number 3. All right, step 3. Planned targeted research. Step 3 is where you shift from searching to strategic retrieval. Random searches are often inefficient and not always lead to the answers you're looking for. Professional research is generally planned. Your plan is built on 3 frameworks. First, the jurisdictional ladder. Records are created at different governmental levels. There's also the church. You do have your own organizational levels as well. You have local, county, state, federal. For example, in the U.S., there's also equivalents to this in other countries. They might have different names and nuances here, but there's often overlap between civil and church records. You need to understand which jurisdiction is responsible for which records at which time that somebody would have been living in or would have likely generated records. In early America, church records often predate civil vital registration, unless you're New England, and there's a lot of civil registration back to sometimes the founding of the colonies. With town records, for instance, but again, then there's places like the South where you have parishes that kept a lot of the records, particularly in the colonial period. I'm just thinking out loud. There's different categories. You have to think systematically what types of records exist. There's lots of resources you can use to try to figure out what does exist and what doesn't. Birth, marriage, and death. Records are actually pretty recent. In a lot of places, you don't get those till the 19th century. Usually the latter end of it. Sometimes it's all the way to the 20th that they start. Marriages usually exist at the beginning, of the jurisdiction keeping government records, but not always. There's some places that didn't make that a requirement. Probates, this calls wills, administrations, guardianships, land, your deeds, your patents, your surveys, court records, tax lists, church records, cemetery records, newspapers, military records, immigration, naturalization. It kind of falls under, those sometimes fall under a bunch of different categories. Each answer different questions because each record has focused information that they capture that you can use to answer specific questions that can be answered with the information they contain. And the third, there's a cluster of FAM principle, friends, associates, and neighbors. We'll discuss this more later, but the key insight is that one subject didn't live in isolation. Researching the people around them often solves problems you can't solve by focusing on just your subject. How many times I've lost track of somebody but found them looking at a family member, and maybe it didn't show up on an index, but it was on the record mentioned, or it was poorly indexed, so it wouldn't showed up. But I recognized the family unit, and I recognized them. It's like, oh great, there's my person. We've never found that had I not examined the fan club. Yep. The deliverable here is a prioritized checklist following the principles of first, best records first. What records are most likely to answer your question? Where are they held? What's the most efficient sequence to search them? As I just mentioned earlier. This plan isn't necessarily set in stone. You tend to adjust it as you learn more. But having a basic preliminary plan prevents you from aimlessly searching. All right, step 4. This is a core function. This is where a lot of the core of genealogy happens. A lot of people are really good at the searching, but they really are lousy in this section. For each record you examine, you have to perform 3 operations. First, you got to extract all the facts. What appears? What are the dates, the places? What relations or state are implied? What occupations, ages, or other biographical details are written down. Write down exactly what it says. Maybe if you think there's an abbreviation, make sure you can put that. Make sure that your interpretation is noted separate from the original. You might also want to consider things that based off you looking at the record set, that there's something it doesn't say is a feature of indicating that something's the case or not the case, like something like a box that should be checked, or a space that's blank that's significant if it's normally filled out, stuff like that. Things where the absence has meaning. We'll get to that later. Second, evaluate the evidence. We'll cover the source information, evidence framework in a few slides, but the basic question is, how reliable is this particular bit of information? Who created this record? How close were they to the event? What biases or errors might have affected the recording? Did they have any incentive to lie or misrepresent the truth? And third, always correlate across records. This is where you build the picture. Does the 1850 census age match what the death certificate says about birth year? Does the birthplace in the marriage record match the origin community mentioned in the family Bible? Build a timeline, reconstruct the household, map the geography. You should note conflicts immediately, but don't try to solve them yet. Just document. The death certificate says he was born in 1842. The census says at age 45 in 1830, implying he was born circa 1835. This would be a conflict. Resolution comes up in step 5. So the deliverables here are 3 things. A research log documenting a research you performed, positive and negative, even if it didn't turn out. I believe that's important later down the road. Extracted notes organized by person or family group, and a working timeline showing chronological sequence of events. This is the ideal. This documentation serves 2 purposes. 1, it prevents you from repeating searches, and 2, allows others to verify your work later, which is a big time saver if you can provide that for somebody. Or yourself several years from now when you've entirely forgotten what you've done and what you were thinking. It happens to the best of us. Even a guy like me, at 30, I forget stuff. Particularly when you're professional and you work on a lot of different people, your brain flushes out the specific nuances of these projects. So like even a few months ago, I would have to look at my research log and report to be able to tell you what I did, because I wouldn't remember the nuances. That's why writing down stuff is really important. Documenting your search. I believe I accidentally did not record this. I included that in the prior slide of collecting, analyzing, correlating evidence. Or maybe I just we just started talking about it. All right, never mind. So step 5. Resolve conflicts and write a conclusion. I guess you have to do this, and you have to do that conflict resolution in writing, so that's why it's all bundled up in the writing a conclusion, because it has to be done in writing for it to be actually done. You can't leave it to be implied, you have to spell it out. Step 5 is where you demonstrate professional skill. The report that some people complain about. Some people complain they don't want to read the report, but they don't want to spend time writing it. Well, I hate to break it to you, but if you don't do this, you have a tree that has lots of documents, but no sense of how they're connected. And if you've ever seen a place where it's messy, where people have attached records from people that seem to be completely different, suddenly we have a question of the methodology that one arrived at, or the lack, or was it, what was the thought process, or was there any thought process? Were you just attaching hints for fun, and it just happened, the computer just suggested that was probably a connection you could make. Computers can't think for you. Computers should never make decisions. It can help you gather the information that you need to make a decision, but that should never be relinquished. Conflicts are completely normal in genealogy. Ages drift in census records for various reasons. They asked the neighbor only slightly knew. Some people felt embarrassed that they were getting older, particularly women. Not to be sexist, but there is documented cases where even Abraham Lincoln's wife lied on the census records. They pulled out the 1850, 1670, and they showed that she didn't age as much as she should have. Anyways, that was a thing where it was rude to ask the age of a woman, and still is in some cases, but that used to be a particularly sensitive point. I noticed that a lot of women wanted to be about the age of their husbands. Sometimes they would even adjust the age of their husband if they couldn't convince the enumerator that they were a certain age, the desired age. They would adjust to reduce age gaps because they were sensitive. They were conscious about a wide age gap between them and their spouse. For instance, I've seen them adjust the numbers. It's interesting. It makes searching fun to find those family groups. Usually you find them by way of their kids, whose ages are usually listed a lot more correctly. Anyways. So the question is whether you will encounter conflicts. You will, but it's whether or not you can explain them that determines whether or not you can check off the box that you have resolved the conflict. Otherwise, you're not really done. When you resolve conflicts by either finding additional sources that tip the balance of evidence, Basically, you find that there's 5 independent sources that say one thing with one that says the other. You pick the one that has the strongest evidence, odd man out, outliers. You evaluate who provided the information, what they could have known, how they would have known it, accounting for patterns. Name variances, age drift, remarriage, step relationships, etc. Information provenance. Documents created while somebody was a child in somebody else's household. It's more likely to be accurate about their age than them as an adult, where there's a lot of variables. Let's see. So when you write a conclusion, it isn't optional. It isn't just for publication. Even have something on file for yourself. A provincial conclusion helps you clarify your thinking, helps you get your thoughts out in ink or digital text. And your conclusions guide you 4 things. First, you have to state your claim clearly, summarize the key evidence supporting it, explain why conflicting evidence is less reliable or refers to somebody else, or it's otherwise not applicable, or as illegitimate, and cite your sources for all your evidence items backing the claim. The forms vary in complexity. Simple cases might warrant a proof summary, a few paragraphs. Complex cases might require a full proof argument, a detailed essay with extensive citations. Even rough draft conclusions can help you see where your evidence is strong and where gaps remain. It's important to play devil's advocate with yourself and say, and also ideally you should try just as hard to disprove a conclusion as you do trying to prove it, particularly in cases where there's room for alternative candidates and scenarios. That strengthens your case if you can present other scenarios and systemically and conclusively refute those, leading to yours. Makes your conclusion way stronger in presentation. Now, your deliverable is a proof summary or proof argument, scaled or sometimes just a statement. If there's just one, it only takes 1 or 2 documents, and there's no controversy. It's really straightforward. Direct evidence. You didn't find anything. You can just say so and so was the son of so and so. There was no conflicts or competing candidates. This is it. I guess in that case, for me, a single sentence is rarely sufficient. And then there's a triple whammy, where you can go and say, and I have DNA test takers who claim descent from this couple, who's parents or grandparents of that individual, and we all match like we're supposed to, and we have segment triangulation. The numbers, you can trace it down to the chromosomes and say, here, look, this is where we all share in common. That's when it's like absolute proof at that point, in my opinion, because by the time you have direct evidence, statements of relationships, and DNA, that's about as firm as it gets. No way, there's no possibility of disproving that. And then crucially, you loop back. Your conclusion almost always generates a new question. You proved the parents or the grandparents. It's a vicious cycle. Who are the rest of their kids? This couple's kids. And sometimes a lot of this is hypothesis and you're charting theories until it all solidifies. But keeping track of what you're doing shows the process. So you can also, if something goes wrong, you find something that really throws a wrench in it, you can also trace your steps back and figure out where a mistake may have been made. Also, if somebody else argues with you, you can pull out your paper and explain your logic with evidence. All right. So this comes down to the Genealogical Proof Standard. Let's discuss the quality control systems that govern professional work, the Genealogical Proof Standard, or GPS. This is the threshold for saying this is proven, which, as I've alluded to earlier. The GPS, or the Genealogical Proof Standard, this is something this is not my own idea. All these principles I'm teaching, I've heard from other people. This one is taught heavily by the board for the certification of genealogists, BGs, for short, are those that are credentialed by that body. Their work, this is considered the gold standard. It's respected by everybody, even an AG like me, an accredited genealogist through ICAP Gen. We deeply respect this, and this is generally considered gospel. So there's 5 elements. This comes from their book. They have genealogical standards. It's a very technical read. Let's see, the GPS has 5 standard elements. One is reasonably exhaustive research. This doesn't mean covering every record ever created, as you might think. Like, you have to look at everything that they could possibly show up in. How do you know what somebody could be in? That's a question I would have as a young genealogist. But what I learned is it means searching thoroughly enough that you're unlikely to have missed evidence that could change your conclusion. If you only searched Ancestry and gathered some possibilities, and you failed to look at offline research or other repositories, you can't consider that exhaustive, particularly if you can think of records that somebody could have reasonably shown up in that you haven't looked at yet. If there's all other relevant record types for the time and place that you believe would be reasonable for a person that you're looking for to show up in, that's usually considered reasonably exhaustive, particularly if you found enough conclusive evidence where an alternative appears to be extremely unlikely. Extra points if there's DNA involved. Second, complete and accurate source citations. This is something that can get any genealogist into an argument. What is a proper citation? I'm not going to bore you to tears with that. There's whole lectures that have been given on that subject, and people disagree. Let's see. Anyways, but the bottom line is every claim must be traceable to its source. A vague citation, such as according to the 1850 census, and just leaving it at that, isn't adequate. We ask where's the original document? What line is that on? That's ideally you should be able to quickly find the information as quickly as possible. Well, what enumeration district is it in? Location. Citations allow you to go directly to the document which the information comes from as quickly as possible, easily replicatable with this little follow-up effort possible. This also includes things like putting hyperlinks in as well. There's some disagreement on whether or not you should put just the website or the active link that might break. I'm in the camp of put the full active link, so that way the person accessing it immediately, while it's active, can immediately get to it, but having enough details that once that link breaks, they would be able to find the original again if they had to. The internet's unpredictable. 3, analysis and correlation of collected information. You can't just dump records into a folder and call it research. You have to evaluate what you found and correlate the information, evidence items across sources. I guess I could talk about what is evidence and break things down. We haven't gotten to that step yet. and maybe a topic discussed in a future lecture. 4. Resolution of conflicting evidence. Conflicts can't be ignored or swept under the rug because you don't want to deal with them, because they challenge your pet theory. If evidence points in a different direction, you got to explain why you find some evidence more credible than others and why you should disregard information from a particular record. And you have to do it convincingly and with scholarly credibility. It's got to sound reasonable to another person. 5. Soundly reasoned and coherently written conclusions. Your argument must be logical and you must be able to articulate clearly. Notice how the 5-step research cycle maps into GPS. If you follow the cycle rigorously, you're operationalizing the standard. The cycle is a method. GPS is the measure. All right, evidence evaluation, which I mentioned earlier. Looks like we got to that a lot sooner than I expected. The evidence evaluation triage. So let's dig into evidence evaluation. This is a fundamental to professional genealogy. When you examine any record, you need to separate 3 things: the source, information, and evidence. First source type is the source type. Is this an original source or a derivative source or an authored source? An original source is a first recording of the information, the actual register page which the minister wrote the marriage entry. A derivative source is a copy, index, transcript, or abstract. Derivatives can introduce errors through transcription, but they're still useful, especially for locating originals. There's authored. Somebody took a bunch of information from several different sources and synthesized it into another work, but somebody did some interpreting and put together something. This is like a genealogy. It can be very useful, but there's a lot of variables like the skill and the knowledge and care and education of that person can matter significantly. Second information type is the information primary or secondary. Primary information comes from an informant with first-hand knowledge, typically somebody who participated in or witnessed an event. Secondary information comes from somebody who learned about it later through another party, through related memory, family tradition, or hearsay, things they've heard from other people. The same record can contain actually both types. A death certificate typically has primary information of the death itself, but secondary information of the deceased's birth, unless it's like a small child where the parent was the informant. But anyways, since the informant usually wasn't present at the birth. Second evidence type: does the evidence directly answer your question, or does it contribute indirectly? Direct evidence explicitly states your answer. Indirect evidence provides pieces of information that require correlation that ultimately leads you to the conclusion of who's related to so and so. Like for instance, you don't know. You find a record where it says somebody is the sibling of so and so. You don't have any direct records that connect your subject to their parents, but you're able to find a record that connects a sibling, a stated sibling, where the sibling's mentioned is directly connected to the parents. That's indirect evidence. You don't get the question answered directly with one statement. It takes multiple documents or information points to come to the same conclusion. Let's see. So, then there's negative information, evidence. This is tricky. This is when the absence of an expected record is itself meaningful, but it's only if the record set or the search you've conducted is known to be complete, and there's no record. You don't believe there's record loss. You believe everything's been, that time period was kept as it was supposed to. and thus somebody not showing up somewhere tells you something specific. Good genealogy is built on indirect and correlated evidence, not one perfect record. You may never find a document that says John's parents were William and Mary, but you may improve it through accumulated indirect evidence through census records, land records, probate, and the fan cluster. Let's see, evidence in practice. Let's see how this works in practice with documents you'd encounter regularly, particularly U.S. research. Let's see how this works in practice. So let's take a death certificate. As we mentioned, death date and place of death, burial, that's usually primary. The physician register had first-hand knowledge, but along with an informant, might be called upon as well. But the parents' names, both the parents' names and the birthplace and the parents' birthplaces of the deceased. It's usually secondary information provided by a surviving family member, somebody who's relying on memory of what they've been told. The informant might be a son who never met his grandfather, guessing his grandfather's name. Or might just mention what's like, I believe he was born in place, and this was his name. His wife was so and so. I believe this was her maiden surname. Sometimes they just don't know, unknown. I believe she was born there. The dead person can't correct them, unfortunately. Now take a birth certificate. The date and place of birth are typically primary. You have to pay attention to when the thing was registered, because it may have happened later, well after the event. There's also these things called delayed birth registrations. They can happen decades later, believe it or not. Someone who's present. Let's see, the mother's name's usually primary. She was definitely there. Hopefully she was asked about her name. But the father's name depends. If the father was present and signed, it's primary. If he wasn't present, secondary information provided by the mother. Technically, I would still consider that primary information, unless there's reason to question that. That's where DNA comes in, right? And even then, even if the dad was there could still be there could be a concealed illegitimacy there. It's known to happen. That's why DNA is fantastic, and why a lot of us, why even direct evidence can be wrong, because it might be true on paper, but it might not be biologically true. Here's a key insight. An original source can still contain secondary information. The document itself might be the original register, but the information recorded in it might have come from somebody with imperfect knowledge. That's why you can't say I have a birth certificate, therefore I know the parents. You need to ask who provided this information. How close were they to the event in the question? What opportunities exist for errors to be introduced? Time, dulling memory, etc. Evaluating every piece of information this way seems tedious at first, but it becomes automatic with practice and prevents you from building conclusions on unreliable foundations. The timeline test. Let's discuss the first of two practical tools that solve most beginner problems, the timeline test. Build a simple chronological tool, timeline for a person or a couple you're researching. List every dated event in order: birth, marriage, baptism, census appearances, court dates, etc., children's births, land purchases, military service, death, probate. Now you have to examine, does this make sense? Can one human being have lived this life reasonably? Although there are some cases where people do live double lives. That's most people. Yeah, anyways, if this timeline doesn't work, you've likely made one of 4 errors. Again, there's exceptions. There's almost exceptions to almost everything, like math or grammar, spelling. Now, let's see. First, you merge 2 people into one. Really extremely common with common names. You're missing a date, and You have records that appear with a wife married in 1840 and a wife named Elizabeth in 1860. Either he's been widowed or divorced, or you have two different men. Third, you have a wrong parent assignment. Is the son born before his parents were married, or worse, before his supposed mother was born? You've definitely got the wrong family. Also, technically same father, or if somebody's born more than 9 months after the father's death, etc. Fourth, there's a place or jurisdiction mismatch. A person cannot be enumerated in two different counties on the same census day. There are a few exceptions to this. Sometimes it happens, and I know I've been told about some, but there's extraordinary circumstances you have to consider before reaching that conclusion. The timelines are often sworn by to be the first defense against errors and figuring out next steps. And you can use it to serve as a sanity check for every new piece of information. Slide 13, or I guess the cluster fan principle. The second tool that solves most beginners' problems is the cluster fan principle. Fan stands for friends, associates, and neighbors. Here's a core insight. People rarely moved, married, or witnessed documents, or migrated alone. They typically lived in social networks. Understanding those networks helps you identify and distinguish your research subject. What should you track? Census neighbors. Who lived near your subject? Did your families appear together across multiple censuses? Did they migrate together? Marriage witnesses. Did they sign the bonds or witness ceremonies? These could have been particularly those that share surnames or appear repeatedly. These are often relatives, brothers, sisters, fathers, uncles, even when the relationship isn't stated. Probate bondsmen. Who provides surety for the estate administrator? These might have been a neighbor, but they were a close associate or relative, or even a relative. You never know. Land records. Who owned adjacent property? Who witnessed your land transactions? Chain of title. Neighbors often reveal family connections. And you'd be surprised, particularly in early periods, early deeds would mention the whole chain of title from like the patent being first granted by the government to that present day. And there's often a lot of information. And sometimes some records between the originals of those events cited have been lost to time for various reasons, but were captured in later entries. So usually a good idea to check. Yeah, that's one of those things that you get to find out with full text search, but that's a topic for another time. Recurring associates, people that appear regularly across decades and record types. Why does it work? Because cluster research solves that same name problem, more likely than hunting for a single perfect record that may not exist. If you can prove that John Smith was consistently associated with a specific group of people or family, the group matches your John Smiths in your records, you've established identity, even without a single document specifically saying this is your John Smith. This is a really powerful tool for common names and periods for systemic vital registration where you have very precise dates that you can use to cross-reference with. Slide 14. Practical starting work, flow kit. So let's distill everything into a minimal operating system you can use. Create a research question, write it down, 1 or 2 sentences, narrow, testable. If you can't articulate what you're trying to prove, you're not ready to search. Step 2, start a research log. For every search, document the date, the repository or database, your search terms, the results, whether you found something or nothing, the citation, the notes of what you learned. This might sound tedious, but it does save an enormous amount of time in the long run. Step 3, build a timeline, what you already have, plot every known event chronologically. Does it make sense? Does it make physical sense? Are there specific gaps or overlaps? Step 3, identify 3 to 5 high-value record sets for the time and place. You don't need to research everything at once. Focus on research on records that are most likely to answer your question. Usually it's also helpful to ask somebody that's done research, experience there, like a professional, to help you plan. Step 5, collect, evaluate, and write a sort of conclusion, even if it's provisional. saying, based on current evidence, John Smith's parents were probably William and Mary, but I need to verify these records and check for this stuff. It's valuable. It clarifies what you know and what you still need. This workflow scales. As your skills develop, you add complexity, more record types, deeper analysis, more rigorous citation practices, but the basic cycle remains the same. So here's some foundational references. Let me point you to some authoritative resources that match what's taught in professional genealogy education. First, the Board of Certification for Genealogists. This is a credentialing organization I mentioned for professional genealogists in the United States. They also do stuff around the world too. Their website includes the Genealogical Proof Standard overview and complete standard framework. It's a really important resource. Next is the Family Search Research Wiki, familysearch.org/wiki. There's a very outstanding free resource for jurisdictions around the world. It's available for the 1850s in Bavaria, South Carolina, England. If you need help reading the Latin Parish Register, they can teach you how to do that. Wiki covers it. It's glad for explaining what exists, what's held, and what they contain. In the U.S., really important is archive.gov. A lot of important research, and most importantly, I recommend reading Elizabeth Shawn Mills' Evidence Explained. It's a textbook, well worth the read. She also has a website that's really important as well. It has a very comprehensive guide, and she's considered, her teachings are considered authoritative. It's a dense book, but anybody worth their salt knows it well. Many of these resources are free, reputable, and will serve you well to develop your practice. You might have Evidence Explained in your local library. All right, here's your key takeaways. Let's see. These principles will serve you regardless of whatever records that you're searching, what time period, what jurisdiction. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions from you. Leave it in the comments. Email me at myfamilygen.com. You can put comments there as well. This is Andre Bagley, an accredited genealogist, owner and operator of Find My Family LLC. Thank you for watching. Thank you, and goodbye.